you may have noticed that the news hasn't been all that fun to watch lately. And yet, underpinning every unexpected hardship we've encountered this year, there's a lingering feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with our system. Sure, we could look at hundreds of graphs or listen to countless experts, but they often point to symptoms of the problem rather than the root issue. So what is that root issue? Well, quite simply, progress is deflationary. Technology is deflationary. And what that means is that as technology advances, we can do more with less. Less labor and capital is needed to create more value. And as technology advances more and more of the world around us, it means that we're entering an age of deflation unlike any the world has ever seen. So why is technology, why is progress the root cause of our struggles right now? Well, it's due to the fact that our economic systems were not built for a world driven by technology where prices keep falling. They were built for an era where labor and capital were inextricably joined, an era where money was made from scarcity and inefficiency. But that era is coming to a close. Despite that, we keep pretending that those economic systems built for that previous era will still work. And rather than let the new system driven by technology take its course, institutions like the Fed have stepped in. And because of their race to the bottom monetary policy, the only thing driving growth in the world today is access to easy credit, which is being created, printed at a pace that is hard to comprehend. So it's the rise of that credit and the corresponding debt that is keeping us locked, frozen into a system where we try to artificially drive economics built from the past. But that's just creating more trouble. And as we continue this path, our world will become profoundly more polarized and unsafe. I mean, just look at all the recent events driven by discontent. So to recap thus far, technology and progress are deflationary, but our institutions have locked us into an inflationary system that is doomed to fail. And let's run down some reasons why our current system is heading for a cliff at an alarming speed. The first and foremost is that the global economy's cost structure has been fundamentally and fatally distorted by central bank policies of inflating asset bubbles and reducing interest rates to near zero or negative. It should be extremely telling that additional stimulus matters more to Wall Street now than news of a vaccine. The second point is that earnings from labor have stagnated or eroded since the era of globalization, financialization took off around 2000. Essentially, wages have plateaued, and that has a lot of people really pissed off. And it's no surprise why, because as the third point, everything costs too much. It's no longer affordable to live the middle-class lifestyle from earnings alone, so the only way that people maintain that lifestyle is to borrow money. And this is true for every sector, be that household, corporate, or government. We are addicted to debt. And so the fourth point is what compounds that. As a result of everyone being in debt up to their eyeballs, everyone now needs every dollar of income just to pay their basic expenses, including the interest and principal on their rising debts. What makes matters worse is that there's no slack or buffers in the system at all. Over the last couple of months, we've seen people lose their employment by no fault of their own, and thus lose their ability to pay for the roof over their head, leading to their eviction because all of their income has gone to paying down debts, so they have nothing to fall back on. And so fifth and finally, we can visualize this as just a row of dominoes because once the first domino, be that the households or the businesses or whatever, starts to fall, every other subsequent domino will fall as well. And we can think of this toppling of the dominoes as a reverse wealth effect. And that's because the wealth effect, that psychological state of euphoria created when your assets steadily rise in value, that's been a core driver of consumption since the Fed transformed the economy into a bubble-based economy in the late 1990s. When we feel wealthier because our assets are rising, we're increasingly likely to tap that newfound wealth by borrowing money to fulfill our desires for non-essential goods and services. And it's no surprise because as the Fed has suppressed interest rates, the cost of borrowing against one's house or buying a new car seemed remarkably affordable, especially compared to the big increases in wealth generated by rising assets. But here's the dark side about the wealth effect. It can reverse, but the debts have to be paid regardless. Debt repayments are forever, while the wealth effect is fleeting. It's very easy to get into debt, but it's very hard to get out of it. So of course, there's a current mass delusion that the Fed can bail out everyone with this cost-free cash that it's pumping into the system, which definitely explains why the stock market has been hitting all-time highs repeatedly. But should the Fed fail to continue to prop up the stock market, should there be any notion that the stimulus to average Americans will not be continued? Well, of course, that macro wealth effect is going to reverse very quickly. And so, of course, this raises the question that if it takes an ever-increasing credit growth to achieve economic growth, how are our economies any different from a Ponzi scheme? As we know, Ponzi schemes are inherently unstable, and once the cracks begin to show, once the greater fool theory starts to play out, once there's nobody willing to put their money into an increasingly irrational market, well, the whole system starts to topple. We have to ask ourselves, at what point does debt slow investors down enough to bring the entire system down? At what point does the future stop paying off the past? And maybe it's time to ask the harder questions. What if the natural order of things was permitted? What if instead of trying to stop deflation at all costs, we embrace it? As technology spreads, deflation happens at a rate that it should. And deflation becomes something celebrated because it means that we're getting more for less. We allow ourselves to accept abundance. Along that continuum, as technology removes jobs and fewer overall jobs are needed, in a deflation-based system, prices will fall instead of continue to rise. And that allows those who lose jobs a way to share in the benefit of technology abundance without massive transfers of wealth, without this race to the bottom policy that only breeds more and more subsistence on a less and less stable system. And yes, this is hard to imagine because we've grown up in a world where these choices did not exist. But I argue that this is a more true version of capitalism, and I'd rather embrace that than continue to support this bloated and corrupted fiat system that has no good solution in sight. And yeah, while I'm sure that governments will not voluntarily give up control of their currencies, we have to remember that a currency only holds value because of the deemed trust we have in it. And that trust is just an agreed upon exchange of value and that the government will keep its promises. But if that trust is compromised, if governments don't keep their promises, even if they pretend to by changing the value of the paper the promise is written on, well, the more and more that trust is eroded, the more likely that an alternative currency becomes an alternative. That alternative, whether it's Bitcoin or something different, will emerge even quicker as institutions like the Fed try to double down on this fiat system that is close to breaking, if not already broken. Meanwhile, the digital and distributed nature of digital currencies such as Bitcoin allow them to benefit from a network effect where each additional user enhances its overall value. And as more users trust the system, the more that trust becomes inherent to the overall structure of the system. That is the fundamental difference between the fiat systems, which are quickly losing trust, and the new technology and trust-based systems that are emerging as an alternative. Reality could easily change tomorrow as more fiat currencies come under pressure. The byproduct of that pressure increases the value of Bitcoin or any other blockchain network. In other words, what starts as a way for citizens in Venezuela and other regions of the world to escape crushing currency devaluation could jump from country to country and easily build to a point where it becomes the de facto standard of trust. So, in summary, we stand at a pivotal point in history, a crossroads of destiny that is defined by our economic systems. Those economic systems and the mechanisms by which they operate are at the heart of many of our issues and challenges and opportunities that will define the end of one era and dictate the beginning of a new one. Central to the discussions and proliferation of these new economic systems, at the heart, the crux of many of our problems, is that technology is the great equalizer, and it needs to be allowed to flourish, especially as it relates to economic systems. What happens when we unleash the potential of these new technologies as we start to rethink old problems with new solutions? It goes a long way to helping to start to rebuild and restructure and rethink a lot of the systems of our world in a way that benefits the many rather than being monopolized by the few. So what do you think? What do you think is the central issue of our time? How should we be responding to it? And where do you think things are going? Of course, while the comment section is a great place to have some of this discussion, I highly recommend you check out both of our Discord servers for Ready Set Crypto and Ready Set Trade, which are free to join and have some awesome discussion going on regarding how to make money in such rapidly uncertain times. So if that's at all interesting, use the links in the bio below to join us, and I can't wait to see you on there. Until the next one, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, cheers.